These real-world places were designed to look perfect on camera. Here are 15 real-world locations that look unmistakably camera-ready, thanks to design choices that make every frame look idealistic. Starting with number 15, the Hobbiton Movie Set. Hobbiton is one of the clearest real-world examples of a location that was deliberately built to look good on camera. Located on a working sheep farm near Matamata in New Zealand's Waikato region, the site was purpose-built for filming the Lord of the Rings trilogy and later expanded for the Hobbit films. Unlike many movie sets that are temporary facades, Hobbiton was constructed with the intention that it would be visually convincing from close-up camera angles as well as wide landscape shots. The site was selected after an extensive aerial search conducted by director Peter Jackson and his team in 1998. The rolling green hills, the lack of modern structures, and natural bowl shape of the land made it suitable for filming without heavy digital alteration. Once selected, the production team worked with the farm's owners to build an entire village from scratch. This included 44 hobbit holes, paths, fences, gardens, and a mill, all arranged to maintain visual continuity. Construction was guided almost entirely by how it would appear on film. The hobbit holes were built at different scales to create forced perspective effects, allowing the actors of normal height to appear much shorter or taller depending on the shot. Doors, chimneys, and furniture were intentionally oversized or undersized, depending on where the camera would be placed. These adjustments weren't meant to deceive visitors, but to work precisely with camera lenses and framing. The materials used were also chosen for on-camera realism rather than longevity. Early structures were built from plywood, polystyrene, and plaster, designed to look like aged stone and timber under cinematic lighting. Gardens were planted not for agriculture, but to give the impression that the village had existed for decades. Moss, lichen, and weathering were manually applied to create a texture that would register clearly on film. After the filming concluded in the early 2000s, most movie sets would normally be dismantled. In Hobbiton's case, though, a decision was made to preserve the site as a permanent attraction. When the Hobbit trilogy entered production, the set was rebuilt more durably using treated lumber, concrete foundations, and permanent landscaping. Those changes were guided by the camera considerations as the film required higher resolution visuals and more detailed close-ups. Today, though, Hobbiton functions as a controlled filming and tourism environment. Every element of the village is maintained to preserve its on-screen appearance. The grass height, plant growth, and even the placement of tools and barrels are regulated to ensure visual consistency. And while it now serves tourists, its layout remains rooted in cinematic logic rather than practical village planning. In this sense, Hobbiton represents a pure expression of camera-first design. It exists because of film, it's maintained because of film, and continues to be valued primarily for how convincingly it appears on screen. Few locations show this concept more directly or transparently. Number 14. The Universal Studios Hollywood Backlot. The Universal Studios Hollywood Backlot is one of the most influential camera-designed environments ever built. Unlike a single movie set, the Backlot is a large, purpose-constructed outdoor filming area designed to replicate cities, neighborhoods, and landscapes for film and television production. It's been in continuous use since the early 20th century, and it remains an active production site today. The Backlot was created to solve a practical problem faced by early filmmakers: the need for consistent, controllable environments that could convincingly represent different locations without leaving the studio. Instead of traveling to real cities, production teams could film in a centralized space where lighting, sound, and access were all controlled. As a result, every structure on the Backlot was designed first and foremost for how it appears on camera. Buildings on the Backlot are typically only facades. Streets that appear deep and expansive on screen often end just a few feet behind the camera. Windows are placed where lenses will capture them, not where rooms would logically exist. Staircases, alleys, and balconies are all sized to fit framing requirements rather than building codes. One of the most well-known areas of the Backlot is New York Street Set, which has been used to represent Manhattan, Brooklyn, Chicago, and numerous unnamed cities. The same buildings can appear as different locations depending on camera angle, signage, and lighting, and that flexibility is intentional. The structures are visually detailed enough to hold up under close inspection on screen. Another cool feature is the courthouse square set, which has appeared in dozens of films and TV shows over decades. The layout allows for a wide establishing shot, medium dialogue scenes, and controlled crowd movement, all without changing locations. The proportion of the square is designed to look realistic through a lens, even though the surrounding buildings may not exist beyond what the camera sees. The natural features on the backlot are also constructed with filming in mind. Hills, rivers, and suburban streets are shaped to allow easy camera placement and predictable lighting throughout the day. Some areas are built specifically to flood or collapse safely, enabling disaster scenes without relying on digital effects. It is important to note, though, that the backlot's not intended to deceive an audience into thinking it's a real city when viewed in person. Its realism exists almost entirely through the camera. When seen from above or from unintended angles, the illusion breaks down, and that's by design. The goal is not architectural, but cinematic. Unlike themed attractions that were built for tourism, the backlot remains a working production environment, and while guided tours pass through certain areas, filming takes priority, and sets are frequently modified, repainted, or rebuilt. The Universal Studios Hollywood Backlot. It's a long-running example of how physical environments can be engineered specifically for the camera. It's not a replica of reality, so much as a tool for creating it on screen. Number 13. The Popeye Village. Popeye Village. It's a rare case when a place was built as a full outdoor town, primarily to be filmed, and then it simply never went away. The village sits in Anchor Bay on Malta's northwest coast, and it exists because a major studio production needed a believable seaside setting that could hold up in wide shots, close-ups, and long-moving camera takes. It was constructed specifically for the 1980 live-action musical film Popeye, starring Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall, produced by Paramount Pictures and Walt Disney Productions. Construction began in 1979, and what makes it stand out isn't that it was just a few facades placed near a road. This was deliberately staged cluster of buildings arranged to read as a coherent village from multiple angles. The site was engineered to support filming locations at a real coastal inlet, including the creation of a breakwater at the mouth of the bay to reduce rough sea conditions. The village, as built for the film, consisted of 19 wooden buildings. Contemporary descriptions of the build emphasize the scale and logistics involved, a huge crew, months of construction, and imported materials and paint. Those details matter here because they explain the core idea that the look wasn't incidental. The production needed a consistent, controllable visual world that matched the storybook design language of the film. On screen, the village needed to sell a very specific kind of geography, a compact harbor settlement where characters can be staged on balconies, along docks, and on streets that visually connect to the water. That's why the layout hugs the cove and stacks structures upwards along the slope. The camera benefits immediately. You can film across the bay and get the entire town in a single frame. You can shoot along the waterfront and always have layered background detail, and you can stage action so that the ocean is present without overwhelming the set. The fact that a protective breakwater was built specifically for the set also shows that the production was shaping the environment to keep the camera's world stable. Filming for Popeye began in January of 1980 and it wrapped later that year. After production ended, the village remained in place and it was gradually converted into a visitor attraction. Today, it's still operating as the Popeye Village, and the site's own materials describe it directly as the original film set built in 1979 with 19 wooden buildings. Because it was designed as a film environment, it naturally offers what filmmakers and photographers always want: strong shapes, readable layers, and a composition that makes sense from multiple viewpoints. Number 12. Main Street, Disneyland. Main Street, USA. It's one of the most influential examples of a real place that was designed by people who thought like filmmakers first and architects second. It opened with Disneyland in 1955 as the park's entry street, meant to feel like an idealized small-town American commercial district. But what makes it belong to a list about looking good on camera is the technique that was baked into the buildings themselves: forced perspective. Forced perspective is an architectural illusion that manipulates scale so that a street reads as taller, grander, and deeper than it actually is when viewed from typical angles, especially the angles people naturally adopt when taking photos and video from eye level. The basic concept is simple. The lower portions of the building are closer to real-world scale, while the upper stories, the windows, trim, railings, and decorative elements are built smaller, making the overall structure appear taller than it physically is. There's an important nuance here, and it's worth being careful about it. Different sources quote different exact scale ratios for Main Street's floors. Some describe a pattern like a full scale at the first level with smaller ratios above. Others describe the first floor as already slightly reduced, for example, 3/4 scale, with the second and third levels reduced further. But there are also credible discussions arguing that the park isn't built into a single rigid set of ratios everywhere, but rather it uses scaling wherever it helps the illusion. What we can say with confidence, though, is why this matters for looking good on camera. Main Street is, in practice, a controlled frame for what's ahead. When you stand near the entrance and point a camera down the street, you get a clean corridor of storefronts guiding your eye towards the central icon at the end. At Disneyland, as Sleeping Beauty's castle. The buildings don't need to be truly tall to read as tall, they just need to photograph as tall from the main viewing path. That forced perspective gives you that without requiring massive structures, and it helps the end-of-street icon feel more dramatic in photos than it would if everything were built at straightforward real-world dimensions. One detailed historical piece about Main Street at the Magic Kingdom in Florida notes the involvement of a Hollywood art director, John DeCoeur, and includes interview material with Imagineer John Hench about design choices, evidence of how strongly Disney leaned on cinematic and theatrical expertise for streets that needed to read instantly to guests. And while Florida's Main Street is a separate build from Anaheim, California's, it's part of the same tradition and used to explain the same illusion techniques and scene-setting logic. Main Street also shows a camera-friendly truth that modern creators still rely on. You don't need reality, you need consistency. The facades don't have to correspond perfectly to the interiors, and the street doesn't have to function like a real commercial district. As long as it looks coherent from the angles people actually see and film from. That's why Main Street remains one of the most photographed streets in the world, despite being intentionally edited by design. Sources do disagree on whether the first level is full scale or slightly reduced, and they don't always cite the same primary documentation. The existence of the forced perspective, though, on Main Street is well established, and the exact ratio should be treated as variable rather than a single universal formula. Number 11. The Las Vegas Strip. The Las Vegas Strip is one of the most extensive real-world environments that was designed with cameras in mind, even though it functions as a working urban corridor. Stretching for about 4 miles along Las Vegas Boulevard South, the Strip is lined with large resort hotels, casinos, and entertainment complexes whose impact is a primary design consideration. From the mid-20th century onward, developers understood that the Strip's success depended heavily on how it looked in photographs, television broadcasts, films, and later online media. Unlike traditional city centers that evolve around transportation or maybe residential needs, the Strip evolved as a linear visual spectacle. Buildings were intentionally spaced apart rather than packed closely together, allowing each structure to be read clearly from a moving car or a wide camera shot. The spacing also enabled long sightlines, making it possible to capture multiple iconic buildings in a single frame. For filmmakers and broadcasters, this meant the Strip could instantly establish location without an explanation. Many of the resorts are designed around a strong visual theme, like pyramids, towers, fountains, or replicas of famous landmarks, chosen specifically because they read clearly on camera. These themes aren't subtle, and that's intentional. A building on the Strip is meant to be identifiable even in a brief shot or a blurred background. And of course, lighting plays a huge role in this camera-first approach. From early neon signs to modern LED facades, illumination has been used to ensure the Strip remains awesome at night. The buildings are not lit just to be seen, but to be recorded. Color contrast, animated light patterns, and high-intensity signage ensure that video cameras and still photography capture clear images even from a distance. The Strip's design logic became especially evident as aerial photography and helicopter shots grew more common. Rooflines, pools, and interior courtyards were increasingly treated as visual assets rather than purely functional spaces. Many resorts featured rooftop elements and large-scale signs that are primarily visible from above, which anticipated aerial filming for promotional footage. Importantly, the Strip's not a replica of a single place or an era. It's a curated visual environment designed to compress many recognizable forms into one corridor. And while the strip serves millions of people annually, its layout is inefficient by normal urban planning standards. The distances between buildings is pretty big, walking routes are indirect, and many interior spaces are designed to delay rather than accelerate movement. These choices make little sense from a transportation perspective, but make perfect sense from a visual one. They allow each resort to function as its own self-contained visual set piece. There's no evidence, of course, that the strip was designed according to a single master plan for filming. Instead, it evolved through repeated design decisions that favored the visual impact. Over time, this produced an environment that's exceptionally well suited to being filmed from almost any angle, day or night. Number 10. The Halstatt Replica. The Halstatt Replica in Huizhou, China is a rare modern example of a real settlement built primarily for how it would look rather than how it would function. Officially known as Halstatt See Huizhou, it's a full-scale reproduction of the Austrian village of Halstatt, constructed as part of a high-end residential development. It was completed in the early 2010s, and it closely follows the visual layout of the original village. The developers didn't attempt to reinterpret Halstatt or adapt it meaningfully to the local architecture traditions. Instead, the goal was to reproduce recognizable visual elements like the church tower, the lakeside buildings, the narrow streets, and the pastel facades. The layout mirrors the compressed geometry of the original village, with buildings tightly arranged along water features and rising terrain. This creates a layered composition that reads well in still images and wide shots. And from many angles, the environment appears older and more established than it actually is, a quality that works particularly well on camera. While modern construction methods were used, exterior surfaces were designed to replicate the stone, timber, and plaster textures associated with the original. The textures add visual depth that photographs and videos capture easily, even when viewed at a distance. From a practical standpoint, the replica has struggled a bit to develop the same kind of everyday life found in long-established towns. Some areas have experienced low occupancy at various times, and portions of the development function more as a scenic backdrop than a lived-in neighborhood. Of course, it's used frequently for photography, weddings, promotional videos, and tourism marketing, and the use is aligned directly with its design. There's no indication that it was intended to deceive in a legal or official sense. It's openly presented as a reproduction, and its relationship to the original is widely acknowledged. However, its existence shows how powerful visual familiarity can be, especially in an era when places are often encountered first through screens rather than in person. As a real permanent environment built largely to satisfy visual expectations, the Halstatt Replica is a modern example of architecture shaped by how it will be photographed and filmed rather than by long-term urban necessity. Number 9. Times Square. Times Square, well, this is a functioning urban space that's been repeatedly redesigned with cameras in mind. Located at the intersection of Broadway and 7th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, it's one of the most filmed and photographed places in the world. While it developed organically in the early 20th, its modern form reflects deliberate choices made to maximize visual impact for broadcast media. The defining visual feature of Times Square is its concentration of large illuminated signs and digital screens. The displays are not incidental decorations, they're at the core identity of the space. Over time, zoning and design regulations encouraged increasingly large and bright signage, creating a vertical field of light that reads clearly on camera from street level. The result is a space that communicates energy and density instantly, even in a brief frame. One of the most important camera-driven moments in Times Square's history is the annual New Year's Eve broadcast. This event's been televised for decades, and it reaches a global audience. The layout of the square, the open sightlines surrounding tall buildings, and central focal point for the ball drop support the broadcast function. Camera platforms, lighting rigs, and crowd control barriers are all integrated into the environment every year. Pedestrianization has also shaped its camera presence. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, huge sections of the roadway were converted into pedestrian plazas. This change reduced the visual clutter from traffic and created open foreground space for filming and photography. Wide, unobstructed areas allow cameras to capture crowds, screens, and architecture without constant interruption from vehicles. Broadway, that cuts diagonally through Manhattan's grid, creates triangular plazas and unusual angles that produce some dynamic compositions. These angles allow filmmakers and photographers to capture layered scenes where screens, buildings, and crowds overlap. Unlike most spaces, Times Square doesn't rely on daylight to be legible or dramatic. This makes it unusually reliable for nighttime filming. News reports, film scenes, and promotional footage can be shot at almost any time with consistent visuals. Over the decades, design decisions favored spectacle and broadcast friendliness. Less visually expressive uses were gradually displaced, replaced by functions that benefit from visibility and media exposure. Because it appears so often on screen, it's become shorthand for New York City and, more broadly, for urban intensity. That feedback loop encourages further design decisions that prioritize visual impact, and it makes sure that the square will continue to function as a global media backdrop, rather than just a neighborhood intersection. Number 8. Seaside, Florida. Seaside, Florida. It's a planned town that was built with a strong emphasis on visual coherence. It's located on the Florida Panhandle along the Gulf Coast. Seaside was developed beginning in the early 1980s as a master-planned community. While it was intended to be a real town, its layout and architecture were guided by principles that translate unusually well to film and photography. Buildings are limited in height, use a controlled palette of materials and colors, and adhere to consistent proportions. Streets are narrow, walkable, and framed by porches, fences, and vegetation that create clear visual boundaries. These choices produce scenes that feel composed rather than accidental, a quality that cameras capture easily. The seaside street layout is another key factor. Roads lead toward visual anchors like the town square, pavilions, or beachfront. This creates natural sightlines that frame subjects without requiring heavy staging. For a camera, this means fewer distractions and more predictable compositions. Shots feel orderly and readable, even when people are moving through the frame. The town gained widespread recognition as a filming location when it served as the primary setting for The Truman Show in 1998. While the film's themes are fictional, the physical environment was not altered into something that wasn't. Its appearance on screen shows how closely the town aligned with cinematic expectations of an idealized community. Public pavilions along the shore frame views of the ocean while maintaining strong silhouettes. These structures function as visual punctuation marks along the coast, making the beach easy to read in wide shots and aerial views. Their repetition and spacing create rhythm rather than randomness. Importantly, Seaside is a fully functioning town. People live there, businesses operate there, and daily life continues year-round. However, its design minimizes visual noise. Utility lines are hidden, signage is restrained, and modern intrusions are tightly regulated. This makes the whole environment easier to film without extensive modification or digital cleanup. Seaside demonstrates that a place does not need to be built explicitly as a film set to be camera-optimized. By prioritizing visual order, scale, and coherence, it becomes a location that consistently looks intentional on screen. Its popularity with filmmakers and photographers shows design choices that favor how a place is seen as much as how it's used. Moving on to number 7, Ia. Ia is a real village that's become globally recognized, largely because of how it appears on camera. It's located at the northern tip of the island of Santorini in Greece. It sits along the rim of a volcanic caldera, with buildings cascading down the cliffs towards the sea. Its architecture follows a highly controlled language. Most buildings are finished in white or light earth tones with smooth plastered surfaces and rounded edges. Blue domes and shutters and accents are all used sparingly but consistently. The limited palette is not accidental either. Local building regulations and guidelines have encouraged uniformity here to maintain the traditional aesthetic, which has proven exceptionally effective on camera. The layout of the town amplifies that effect. The narrow pedestrian paths curve along the cliff edge, revealing layered views of rooftops, terraces, and stairways descending toward the caldera. From a camera's perspective, this creates depth and visual rhythm without requiring wide streets or large open spaces, and foreground, midground, and background elements naturally stack within a single frame. Following a major earthquake in 1956, large portions of Santorini, including Ia, were rebuilt. During reconstruction, authorities emphasized architectural continuity rather than modernization. That decision preserved the village's appearance while allowing it to withstand the seismic activity. The result is a settlement that looks old and organic on camera while meeting modern requirements. Tourism growth then led to further controls rather than visual dilution. Signage is restrained, utility infrastructure is hidden or buried, and building heights are limited. These measures reduce the visual noise and it makes the village easier to film without digital alteration. It's important to be clear about one point. EO was not originally built as a film set or a tourist attraction. This camera-friendly quality emerged from traditional construction methods. However, the current form of the village is the result of conscious choices that prioritize how it looks when viewed and filmed. EA demonstrates how a real place can become visually optimized. The appearance is not exaggerated or theatrical, it's carefully curated. The village works exceptionally well on camera because its architecture and regulations align to present a coherent visual identity. Number 6. Gardens by the Bay. Gardens by the Bay is a contemporary public space designed with visual media in mind. It's located in Singapore's Marina Bay area. The project opened in phases beginning in 2012, and it was later part of a broader effort to reshape the city's image. Unlike historical towns that later became photogenic, this site was intentionally engineered to produce amazing visuals in photographs and film. The most recognizable elements are the super tree structures. These are large vertical forms ranging from roughly 25 to 50 meters in height. They serve practical purposes too, like ventilation, shading, and solar energy collection, but their form is unmistakably sculptural. Open sightlines connect the super trees to the surrounding skyline, including the waterfront and the nearby high-rise buildings. This arrangement allows cameras to capture the contrast between organic forms and an urban development within a single frame. The park does not attempt to hide the city. Instead, it frames it. At night, the super trees and conservatories are illuminated in a controlled sequence, producing amazing visuals. This makes the location particularly suitable for televised events. The lighting is bright enough to register clearly on camera without overwhelming detail. The two large conservatories, the Flower Dome and the Cloud Forest, were also designed with visibility in mind. Their glass envelopes are shaped to minimize visual distortion, and from the outside they function as legible forms, and from the inside they provide framed views of the surrounding city and gardens. Gardens by the Bay's paths, bridges, and viewing platforms were placed to guide movement towards the visually strong areas. Elevated walkways offer controlled vantage points, and these features benefit visitors, but they also provide predictable framing opportunities for media crews. The location of the park, situated near the central business district and major landmarks, allows a single shot to communicate both greenery and urban density. And while it is a public space used daily by residents and tourists, the design tolerates heavy filming activity. The surfaces are durable, circulation routes are wide, and maintenance routines preserve the visual order. This is a clear example of a real-world environment built with cameras in mind. Its success lies not in spectacle, but in repeatability. It produces consistent, recognizable images across seasons, times of day, and media formats, which fulfills the visual goals embedded in the design. Number 5. Dubrovnik. Dubrovnik's Old Town is a historically layered urban space that has become recognizable largely because of how it appears on camera. Enclosed by intact medieval walls and set directly against the Adriatic Sea, the city presents a visually complete environment from almost every angle. Its most important feature is the fortification system. The walls here form a continuous elevated perimeter that allows wide, uninterrupted shots. From above or from the water, the city reads as a unified object rather than a fragment of a larger urban sprawl. This kind of clarity makes Dubrovnik unusually easy to establish on screen with a single shot. Within the walls, the architectural consistency plays a major role. Buildings follow similar heights, roof materials, and stone construction techniques. The dominant use of pale limestone creates a surface that reflects light evenly, and on camera, this produces clean contrast between buildings, sky, and water without excessive shadow noise. Dubrovnik's main street, Stradun, contributes to this cinematic quality. The broad, straight limestone paved avenue here creates a strong central axis through the city. Because vehicular traffic is excluded, the street remains visually uncluttered, allowing scenes to be filmed without modern intrusions. The utility lines here are hidden, signage is tightly controlled, and new construction within the Old Town is heavily regulated. Those measures were adopted primarily for its preservation, but they also reduce visual distractions that cameras would otherwise capture. Gates, bridges, and harbor entrances are arranged in ways that create natural framing at the entrances for wide shots and movement sequences. Approaching Dubrovnik by sea or from an elevated viewpoint produces a gradual reveal that translates well to film language. But it is important to clarify that Dubrovnik's frequent use as a filming location didn't drive its original design. The city's appearance on screen helped justify stricter controls that preserved this visual integrity. Its camera appeal is the result of centuries of construction, combined with modern restraint, not artificial staging. Number 4. Banff Avenue. Banff Avenue. It's a functioning commercial street designed and regulated in a way that strongly favors camera-friendly views. It's located within the town of Banff within Banff National Park. The avenue runs directly towards Mount Cascade, creating a visual corridor between urban storefronts and a dramatic mountain. Early town planning and later regulations preserved the street's sightline towards the surrounding mountains. Building heights are limited, rooflines are controlled, and architectural styles are constrained. The rules were developed to protect the scenery, but they also ensure that photographs and film capture a clean transition from town to wilderness. The street is wide enough to allow long shots that include sidewalks, storefronts, and distant mountains without visual crowding. The sidewalks are active but orderly, and signage is regulated to prevent visual overload. From a filming perspective, the street functions like a natural establishing shot. The materials and colors are managed carefully. The stone, timber, and muted paint tones dominate the buildings, preventing any harsh contrasts, and that kind of consistency allows the mountains to remain dominant visual elements even when the camera is positioned at street level. Seasonal change also adds some visual variety without disrupting it. Snow, autumn foliage, and summer greenery alter the appearance of the avenue while preserving its underlying geometry, and this makes Banff Avenue adaptable for filming across different times of year. Because Banff sits within a valley, the peaks remain visible from multiple angles. Camera positions along the avenue can capture the depth and scale that would be impossible in a flatter town. And this kind of natural framing has made Banff Avenue a frequent subject of promotional imagery and broadcast coverage. This one shows how regulation and restraint can create a street that consistently looks composed on camera, even when it's serving daily commercial needs. Number 3. Chefchaouen. Chefchaouen is a real mountain town whose visual identity has become inseparable from how it appears in photographs and video. Located in the Rif Mountains of northern Morocco, the town is known for its extensive use of blue-painted walls, steps, and doorways. And while the practice has historical and cultural roots, its modern uniformity has been reinforced in ways that strongly favor visual consistency. Narrow streets, stairways, tight corners, they all create layered compositions that naturally frame subjects. From a camera's perspective, foreground walls, midground passages, and background hills stack together without requiring wide streets or open plazas. Different shades of blue are used across the buildings, producing variation without any visual chaos. And on camera, this reduces color noise and creates a cohesive environment. Shadows and highlights remain legible because the tones are controlled. In many areas, repainting is encouraged or maintained to preserve the town's visual identity, and while residents continue to live and work there, the overall appearance remains consistent across the neighborhoods most frequented by visitors and photographers. The surrounding mountains rise up behind the town, providing a neutral, textured backdrop. The separation between the town and land makes the blue structures stand out sharply in wide shots. And it's important to note that it wasn't originally designed for filming. Its camera-friendly qualities emerged over time through a single planning decision. However, the town's present appearance reflects a shared understanding that its visual coherence is a defining asset. Chefchaouen is an example of how color discipline, scale, and topography can transform a living town into a globally recognized visual environment without altering its fundamental function. Number 2. Palmanova. Palmanova is an example of a real city whose visual form was deliberately engineered to be legible, symmetrical, and striking when viewed from above. Founded in 1593 by the Republic of Venice, Palmanova was built as a fortified town with a precise 9-pointed star shape. While the city predates photography and film by centuries, the geometry aligns remarkably well with modern camera perspectives. Star forts were developed to withstand artillery fire, using angled bastions and layered defenses to eliminate blind spots. In Palmanova's case, this logic was applied with unusual rigor and completeness. The entire city, walls, streets, and central square was laid out according to a single geometric plan. From the ground, it feels orderly but restrained. The streets radiate outward from a central hexagonal square, dividing the city into equal sectors. For cameras positioned at street level, the effect is subtle but noticeable. Streets align cleanly, buildings maintain consistent heights, and visual clutters minimized. Each bastion mirrors the others, creating a visual rhythm that holds together even at a large scale, and this makes the town especially well suited to aerial photography, diagrams, and overhead filming where the entire city can be seen in a single frame. Roads and rail lines were routed carefully to avoid disrupting the star pattern, and those decisions were made primarily for heritage preservation, but they also ensured that the city's geometry remains readable on camera. Unlike many historic towns, though, Palmanova doesn't hide its structure beneath layers of altered construction. Its defenses weren't dismantled to accommodate expansion, and its street plan wasn't overridden by industrial growth. And that restraint means the contemporary images of Palmanova closely resemble historic plans and engravings. Palmanova shows how strong geometry can translate seamlessly into visual media. The city doesn't rely on ornament, color, or dramatic landscapes. Its impact comes from proportion and repetition. As a result, it's one of the clearest examples of a real-world place whose form reads immediately and convincingly when captured from a camera. Number 1. Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill is a functioning political district whose layout and architecture were deliberately designed to project clarity and authority. Located in Washington, D.C., the area surrounding the United States Capitol was planned as part of a broader vision for the nation's capital, one that understood the power of visual representation. At the center of Capitol Hill is the Capitol building itself, positioned on elevated ground and aligned with major avenues. The placement was intentional. The building is meant to be visible from multiple directions, rising above the surrounding structures. Height restrictions across Washington, D.C. preserve that relationship, ensuring the Capitol remains visually dominant. The surrounding street plan reinforces that dominance. The broad avenues radiate outward, creating long sightlines that frame the Capitol as a focal point. A single view down a straight avenue communicates location, purpose, and scale without explanation. Buildings near Capitol Hill are restrained in height, material, and ornamentation. The stone facades, formal proportions, and symmetrical layouts all dominate, and that reduces visual noise and keeps attention centered on the institutional landmarks. Open spaces play a critical role too. The Capitol grounds and surrounding plazas provide unobstructed foregrounds for wide shots and public gatherings, and those spaces are regularly used for speeches, ceremonies, and media coverage, precisely because they allow large crowds and structures to be captured cleanly within a single frame. It's worth noting that Capitol Hill was not designed for entertainment or spectacle in the modern sense, that visual clarity is symbolic and communicative. However, those same qualities, symmetry, scale control, and clear hierarchy, translate extremely well to cameras. Capitol Hill is at the top of this list because it shows how visual planning can shape perception on a national and even global scale. It's a working place whose design consistently communicates authority and purpose through imagery. In an era where political moments are experienced primarily through screens, Capitol Hill continues to perform the role it was built for: to be seen, recognized, and understood immediately.